Welcome, and you all know who I am, and I want to introduce your presenter, Dr. Mary Jane Eisenhauer. And Dr. Eisenhauer works for the Porter County Foundation. She is the one that has spearheaded their First Things First program, which you should ask her about if you know anyone in Porter County. Please have them look up the Porter County Foundation. Their goal is to make contact with every newborn born in Porter County in order to make their life better, okay? And she is a professor emeritus from Purdue Northwest. And she has a doctorate in early childhood education. And I'm introducing her because she's also a lifelong friend of mine, and she would never say wonderful things about herself. So she helped to create the early learning standards in the state of Indiana, and she has consulted with preschools that have opened and the Boys and Girls Club and different organizations that support kids. So everything that she says is wonderful. She has a lot of experience. So I hope that this will be helpful for you. Everybody else is talking about NWEA and SAT, but we can't really give the SAT test to our preschoolers. So that is why when I spoke with Mary Jane, she said that she could speak about authentic assessment. So using the skills that she's going to share with you to determine where your kids are and where you can help them grow to, okay? And hopefully we'll be quiet on the other side of the wall. All right, so Mary Jane, I'm going to let you take
All right, super, thank you. One thing Julie didn't say was that I was a kindergarten teacher. That's where my passion started for little people, and I was actually a kindergarten teacher at a Catholic school in Chicago. So I feel very much at home here, and I'm just so grateful for your time today. And I want to begin with a story, because anytime I'm feeling kind of nervous and itchy and not really sure what's going to happen, just like our little people, I think it's always good to just read a story, because we know that the most important thing you can do for later success is to read to children. There is nothing better that you can do, and the best advice I got when I started as a kindergarten teacher was, when everything else is falling apart, pick up a book and read. So this is one of my most favorite stories. How many of you know Mr. Gumpy's Outing? By John Birmingham. So I think this is the perfect book for early educators. I think Mr. Gumpy would have made a fantastic early educator, because he's really attuned to his little people, his friends' needs. But this is Mr. Gumpy's Outing, and here he is, Mr. Gumpy. Mr. Gumpy owned a boat, and his house was by a river, right? So the perfect environment for learning. So here he is. Mr. Gumpy was going to have a great day with all of his friends out on the boat. The children said, "Can we come with you?" And yes, said Mr. Gumpy, "if you don't squabble." So he knows their needs. He's recognized who they are and what they're good at, but also maybe where they need some support. "Can I come along, Mr. Gumpy?" asked the rabbit. "Yes, but don't hop about." So he knows the rabbit's really good at hopping, but in this situation, that rabbit's going to have to, develop some self-control. "I'd like a ride," said the cat. "Very well," said Mr. Gumpy, "but you're not to chase the rabbit." "Will you take me with you?" said the dog. "Yes," said Mr. Gumpy, "but don't tease the cat." "May I come, please, Mr. Gumpy?" said the pig. "Very well, but don't muck about." "Have you a place for me?" said the sheep. "Yes, but don't keep bleating." "Can we come too?" said the chickens. "Yes, but don't flap," said Mr. Gumpy. "Can you make room for me?" said the calf. "Yes, if you don't trample about." "May I join you, Mr. Gumpy?" said the goat. "Very well, but don't kick." And for a while, they all went along happily, but then, just like our friends in preschool and kindergarten, the goat kicked, the calf trampled, the chickens flapped, the sheep bleated, the pig mucked about, the dog teased the cat chased the rabbit hopped, the children squabbled, the boat tipped. Guess what happened? Into the water they fell. Now, what do you think, Mr. Gumpy? I've already given you a clue. I think he would be an amazing early educator. What do you think he did?
help them all back in the boat.
Mr. Gumpy and the goat and the calf and the chickens and the sheep and the pig and the dog and the cat and the rabbit and the children all swam to the bank and climbed out to dry in the hot sun. We'll walk home across the field, said Mr. Gumpy. It's time for tea. And there they are. Goodbye, said Mr. Gumpy. Come for a ride another day. There wasn't any punishment. There wasn't like, let's go back and try it again. You've got to learn how to ride in this boat. So that's why I just love Mr. Gumpy. Maybe you know of a Mr. Gumpy as well. So let's begin. And again, thank you for your attention and being here today. If I'm not talking loud enough, give me a wave. But who am I? Julie kind of gave you the overview. But really, I think the most important thing for you to know about me is that I love children. I'm really passionate about just childhood in general. I'm really concerned about where our children are going to be. And I think that as early educators, we have so much to teach everybody above us. And for so long, it's kind of been pushed down on top of us. So I want to empower you today with some information that hopefully you can hang on to and help your colleagues, your administrators, understand why it's so important that we really respect the dignity of children and all of that. So between kind of going to school and being a kindergarten teacher and then kind of going and teaching college kids, I stayed home with my 3 children. That was my child development lab, and I learned a lot from them. And that's kind of, and just watching them learn and grow, but also go into school. So let's do this. Who are you? Thank you for putting your names out there. I don't want to take time to go around and kind of give everybody's name, but if you are a kindergarten teacher, please stand up. All right, thank you. If you are a preschool teacher, if you consider yourself a preschool teacher, Julie said there's pre-K, preschool, together. Well, I guess, let's say if you consider yourself to be pre-K only, stand up. Okay, if you are preschool, okay. And we can talk about what that means later. We'll talk about language. Let's see, if you plan to be outside at any time this weekend, stand up. All right, have a seat. If you prefer fall to spring, stand up. Okay, all right. If you had a ham sandwich for lunch, stand up. Anybody have ham? All right. And if you will be celebrating Halloween in your classroom, please stand up. Okay. All right, super. That just gives me a little bit of sense of who you are. Before we do that, I also want to take a check-in, right? So many of you were able to add to our graph over here about how you're feeling right now. Wow. Most of you are feeling pretty happy, so that's fantastic. Some of you are feeling excited. I'd like to be part of the cool group, so thank you. And somebody's feeling bored, so hopefully we can change that. But what I'm really happy to see is that nobody's feeling especially embarrassed right now or hungry or confused. So there's some information about all of us together today. And I guess I would add myself to the excited column as well. How many of you are familiar with the KWL strategy? Okay, so KWL is what do you know? So as you walked in and you got engaged right away, which is what we do with our little people anyway, what do you know? That's the very first assessment you can start with. What is it that you know? So I asked you to write down an idea, and let's see what some of you came up with. There's no standard assessment. This is true. In our state, we do not have a standard assessment in early childhood. It can be formal or informal, that's for sure. And we also know that most of the time it's informal. I hate them. Wow, okay, that's a good thing to know. That's a good piece of information for me to have. And maybe we can change some minds and hearts here. I think how many, I guess if you also hate them, stand up. Let me see what anybody. Thank you, Kate. That's great.
I don't like to assess them. It takes me so long. But I like the result because then I see what my focus is.
Okay.
I just.
All right, so maybe we can change minds and hearts a little bit about thinking about what is it that we're assessing and why. It can be subjective. Most of the time it is subjective, right? We're human. Lets us know where students are. It talks about developmental strengths and weaknesses. It can show growth. It's data-based, right? So we're collecting data, and data can be numbers, which is not always the place that we live in as early educators. It can also be qualitative, meaning it can be words and stories. It can be pictures, observation for sure, and they can show progress over time. So this is a helpful baseline for me, and we've just completed an assessment right here. So what did I learn by asking the question, what do you know?
Someone hates them.
Someone hates them, right? So I have some work to do. There's some quality, right? So we do actually, as a group collectively, we do have a sense about nobody, this isn't completely blank. So there's some knowledge, there's knowledge base here. We also know children, and actually all learners learn socially, so we can build on this baseline of knowledge that we have here. So that's one way to begin assessment, just by asking, what is it that you already know, so you can start to assess. What do you want to know about assessment? So we're going to pause there. I'm going to grab my wonderful, when I got to the foundation, which is, it's kind of very fancy and buttoned up. It's not at all like kindergarten. And they learned that I like smelly markers, so they got me my own little box of smelly markers. So I'm very happy about that. Makes me feel at home. But tell me, what are some things that you want to know about assessment? Just yell them out.
How to go through it faster?
Okay, so let's call that efficiencies.
How to use the data.
Ah.
Once we have it, what to do with it. How often?
How to explain the data to parents?
Okay, so how to communicate it.
What's
Some-
the best way to record it? Some people do online, and so what's the best way to do that?
How it makes the child feel when you do them?
So that impact on the child, sure. Okay. As you think of more things, feel free to come on up and add them. But again, we've just continued this assessment. And what have I learned here, and how is this helping me to make decisions about our time together today?
Well, you can focus on these topics. This is what we want to learn.
This is what you want to learn. You have some motivation to learn, right? So I've taught a 16-week course on assessment. So I have I have a sense of kind of where we want to head. But at the same time, if I came in here with my own agenda and just started talking at you, you may not be as engaged as if you were going to I'm going to try my very best to hone in on some of these questions that you have come up with. So this data piece of the questions that you have asked is a data point. It's helping me to make decisions about our time together today and informing our instruction, okay? And then at the end, in our short time together, I'm going to ask you to tell me, what is it that you learned today? Hopefully you can walk away with even just one new idea that you've learned today. All right. So our goals for today are to talk about what do we mean by authentic assessment, and talk about how does that relate to teaching and learning. Talk about the purpose, why do we do this, and in what ways, somebody had the question of, how do we record it, or what are the best ways to use this in practice, and think about a process for implementing authentic assessment. So I want to challenge you, as I'm sharing today and as you're talking in your groups, how might this become real for you on Monday of next week, on Thursday of next week, by December, by January? What is maybe one thing you want to try and implement? And then we can also identify a variety of authentic assessments. So hopefully that meets your goals as well. But this is really the gist of it, right? It's about being curious. How do we know what children know and can do? That's really what we're talking about in terms of authentic assessment. I like to think about it in terms of 3 questions. So what? What is it that children know and can do? So what? Why is that important? And then now what? How does this inform what I'm doing next? So if you can kind of keep that framework of those 3 questions in mind, we can, I think, develop some efficiencies around our data collection. So being curious, really being a scientist in this way, kind of going out and being a naturalist or an anthropologist and collecting this information about what is it that I'm seeing, how does that help me do my job of instructing, and then what am I going to do differently in the classroom, or why are these things important? Does that resonate with anybody? Okay. So what do we mean when we say authentic assessment? So assessment in general is really just a catalyst for continuous improvement. Really, it's just about continuing to hone our practices. And a lot of what we talked about what you know and the questions you have were really child-centered. Of course they were, because we're focused on the little people in our classrooms. But who else might we be assessing, or what else might we be assessing? So that self-reflection piece. So if I could just go off on a tangent for a moment. I went to this conference one time, and I would tell my college students this, and I was going on and on about circle time and how great it is, and reading stories, and yada, yada. And the whole thing's over, and somebody raised their hand, and they said, well, what do I do with the little one who just won't sit still and listen to the story? So I go off on another tangent, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling all these different things. Come back to my class the next week, and I tell a student who was at the conference, I said, this is what happened. And she said, oh, that's funny, because the guy in the room next door, that the session she had attended, the similar situation. And I said, well, what did he say? What answer did he give? And the presenter looked at the teacher and said, now forgive me, maybe your circle time sucks. And so maybe it's the teacher, right? It's not the child that's having a hard time, but maybe it's the teacher who's not presenting the information in a way that addresses the children. So, right, I think that self-reflection piece. What else might we want to observe or assess or whatever else? I know, I've just thrown you all for a loop. Process that for a moment.
Now we're all going, wow, maybe my circle time.
Right, but that is a challenge, right? To take the focus away from what's happening in front of you, to really step back and think, like, what's going on with me here? I doubt it. You're here to learn. We're all on this journey. It's a work in progress. So, but I just appreciated the directness and kind of that focus back to, it really is about the adult-child interaction, and it's not always about testing children or getting children to comply. It's really about understanding. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, of course, because I have the mind of a child, so I know where to place my students. Who's excelling?
Okay, yes, yep.
Weaknesses, I can identify strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, great. All right, any other ideas about authentic assessment?
I think, even though I hate it, I think assessment keeps me honest. Because if everybody doesn't know something that I've expected, it gives me the chance to say, wow, I need to work harder with that because I'm not doing a good enough job.
Absolutely. So making decisions about the experiences and the environments that you're creating. How many of you have done an audit of your environment?
How would we do that?
Maybe we haven't, don't know it.
Okay. Have any of you stopped for a moment and counted how many blocks you have? Do you have block corners? I hope.
Yeah, it's like hundreds, yeah.
Hundreds, okay. Do you have conflict in the block corner?
No.
Okay, because you have enough blocks. Where's another question you have about a class?
Baby dolls.
Baby dolls. How many baby dolls do you have, and what do they look like?
They all look the same. I have 4 bald baby dolls. They all look different colors, but they all look the same.
And everybody wants the baby dolls?
Everybody wants the one with like the blue eyes.
Okay, so there's a classroom audit, a materials audit.
So yesterday, they were playing with Dora, and I do partners.
Uh-huh.
And there were 2 Doras, and I have 2 Doras on purpose, because then we each get one.
Yeah.
And so one of the girls was sad because her partner wouldn't give her a Dora. So I said, I have 2 Doras for a reason, so you each get one. So I guess that would be,
So there's an informal assessment, right? Like, and that's a situation that's working.
yes.
So fantastic, give yourself a gold star, that's right. Other things that are pain points in your classroom. Trains, right? So have you counted how many trains? Do you ever do like a frequency count, just a tally mark of, I don't know, how many interruptions you have during a storybook?
Yes.
Okay? That's not about children, that's about like, okay, here I've noticed over time children are interrupting during the story. I'm gonna have myself or a volunteer or my assistant in the classroom just count how many interruptions there are. And let's track that for 5 days in a row. Are there more on Mondays than there are on Thursdays? Let's be curious. So it's really about getting curious and thinking about how you can evaluate your environment. It's not about assessing children, but it's assessing the experience or the environment. So I think assessment is really at the foundation of teaching and learning. And so a lot of you have talked about it's building on the strengths of that individual child and responding to their needs. So if you think about a child, and maybe they're having a difficult time separating in the morning, right? So thinking about, all right, let me watch this for a little bit and see how that interaction goes. Let me watch them during the rest of the day and see where are the places where that child likes to go in the classroom. All right, let's make a plan now. I have this data where I see there's a challenge in separating, but I know that later on in the day the child really enjoys being at the easel and painting. So let's work out a plan with mom or dad or grandma, whoever drops them off, to get engaged at the easel right away. So there's some data that you use now to make decisions about what's happening in your classroom. That's an authentic assessment. And then it's also to help you plan and create those learning environments and experiences. All right, but how do you know what kinds of experiences and environments you should be using? Where do it just doesn't come out of the air. What resource do any of you use to decide what to assess?
I've used the foundations from IEYC.
Fantastic, that was the answer I was looking for. It's not fair, there was a right answer to this, right? But I want to encourage you to take a look at the foundations to the Indiana Academic Standards. Even if you teach kindergarten, those foundations go from infancy all the way through kindergarten. So at the beginning of the kindergarten year, right, you may be thinking about what it's going to look like in May, but you also kind of need to have a sense of what were the expectations for that child as they finish their year of really having a great year of being 4. And so that's where you can start to make plans. Julie put together a Google folder for you, and the foundations are in there. Don't pull out your laptop and look at them now. Pour yourself a cup of coffee next week and dig through those. But there's several different domains throughout there that are appropriate. I love the foundations because they include things like approaches to play and learning, which is not something that our friends in elementary and high school look at. They look at self-help skills and executive functioning. So very appropriate to what we know our little friends need to have. So I have those in there as well. So why do we do this? We talked a little bit about why. And so we do that because, for a variety of reasons, right, again, looking at the individual child, but also looking them as part of a group. So whether that's kind of like you said, figuring out which groups might go together if they're having they're all working on some particular skill and they're at the same level, or it might be partnering children for a particular skill or a piece of knowledge. Also to make adjustments to your instruction and support. Who talked about communicating with others. So the more data you have, the more information you have, the easier it is to communicate to others, whether that's your colleagues, that's your administrators, or parents, or caregivers, or perhaps it's the community writ large. This is what we're doing in preschool. I know Kate does a great newsletter. I've seen it. And you know, Kate, I'm just because I know you, I'm going to shout you out. She also puts it in the local newspaper, right? So we get like these blips about what's happening in Mrs. Bobillo's pre-K classroom, and she's able to provide that because she's done these rich observations that give her this data that she can now communicate. That's not a sense of like where children are. She's not reporting out like this child is, you know, doing this and this one's doing this. This is kind of as a whole, these are the stories we can tell about what's happening in our classroom. And then of course we always have these accountability reports. I don't feel like we're at the place yet, especially in pre-K, maybe kindergarten, where there's this huge measure of accountability for pre-K. It's coming, right? We know it's gonna happen. And so the better we can get at developing our skills with authentic assessments, as observers, as recorders, as just being curious about children's development, I think the better we'll be able to contribute to those accountability reports in a really meaningful way. Because it doesn't help us to say like, you know, my friend over here knows all 26 letters of the alphabet, and yet they're really struggling to hold a pencil. That's a story that can't be told in numbers. That story has to be told with words and pictures. So that's part of the assessment process as well. So how do we do that authentically? We want to have objective and detailed information. So it is subjective, right? We are human, but we try to take off our personal lens and really think about this through the lens of a news reporter. Just the facts, ma'am. Just tell me the facts, and then we can start to interpret that in a way. So being aware, again, of your own biases. You know, unfortunately, there may be a child that you don't like. We've all had that, maybe one in our whole careers that we just didn't really like for whatever reason. But understanding, like, this is a child with their own journey, and how do I help them, whatever it is. And so figuring out from yourself, it's not the child's fault that you don't have it clicked with them, you haven't established rapport, but really kind of digging into and getting curious about what is it about this child that's making this relationship so difficult, and then being able to kind of get past that personal feeling to think about where they are developmentally. This can only happen, I believe, through those informal daily interactions and observations. And those happen during familiar routines. Because why? Because the routines are what children know. So we don't need to put them in an unfamiliar situation. Somebody asked about the question of the impact on the child, right? Think about all of us just a few moments ago when we had all this noise and distraction. Like, it was really hard for all of us to kind of concentrate and come together. So now we're going to put a child into this unfamiliar setting with this new tool and maybe new materials and say like, okay, now you need to perform. That's not going to give us accurate, detailed information that's going to be helpful to understand what that child knows and can do. So let's observe children during those familiar routines to hear their language, to look and see like how do they write their name on a sign-in sheet that's really important, right? So they're performing not just for the purpose of writing their name, there's a real purpose here in signing in with their name. So how many of you use sign-in sheets? And how, when you use them, do you do any kind of analysis of children's writing over time? Yep. So it's really fun to watch and see, like, from that very first day of school through the end of the year, their letter formation, right? So tell us a little bit about it, if you wouldn't mind, what you see.
Oh, when I developed them, we put them in their portfolio. And just to see the progress they made from the first time they signed in to that last day.
Yes.
And even holding the pencil,
Absolutely.
forming the letters and stuff, and going from a big thick crayon to just a little pencil.
And so it sounds like you've scaffolded that experience. Well, hi, Doug. How are you? You've scaffolded that experience with like the big pencil, the big square of paper where they can write their name, maybe providing a model for them to copy, and then slowly pulling those scaffolds away. And that's an authentic assessment, that growth over time. And as you watch and see children sign in, then you're like, okay, I know my friend over here, they need help with whatever it might be. So that's another way to use that authentic assessment. Questions about that, or other examples in which you've maybe, if you think about how you are looking at children writing their name, how do you know if they're making progress in name writing?
I
I do a monthly write your name, this is my name, the first day of school, September, October, and then at the end of the year, we put together a book just to see, I've shown the parents at conferences, I said, this is the first day, and look at the difference in just 1 month.
Yeah.
How much difference it
Right,
was, so.
okay, all right. And is there any, that's just a task that they do? Is it part of a routine or anything, or
I
they?
just do it at the end of the month. Say,
Okay.
We're gonna write our name,
Yeah.
and they have their name tags, I said, if you can write your last name also.
Okay, great. And that might be something you want to think about, how to incorporate that into just an informal way that's part of a routine. So that because it doesn't become this like task that you have to be responsible for, so that efficiency, right? Like 3 days into kindergarten, preschool, everybody knows, all right, I have to write my name and I'm going to write it however I can. That takes the responsibility off of you to here we go. Now you've just got this stack of sign-in sheets that you can use to analyze over time. So that's just one way to do that. Other ways that you might take a look at children's name writing.
On their papers.
Okay, yep, so that's just part of the routine as well. So you've got to write your name at the top of the paper. And how do you record that? So like at the top of so it's at the top of the paper. Do you ever stop and say like, all right, I'm not going to worry about whatever else is on this paper? You do.
See if they're forming their letters, because they don't have a model. So, and whether their name is, the letters are mixed up.
Yep.
So, like the last letter is the first letter, and, or if, if it's all over the paper.
Yep.
So
Right.
some will write letters, it's their name, but it's all over the paper.
It's a string of letters in different ways, right? So that gives you a sense of, right? So that's another way that you can take a look, just in those natural ways, right? It gives you a snapshot in time of what that child is able to do and knows. It also can lead to changes in support and how you interact with that child. I think the most important thing, if you don't remember anything else, that authentic assessment is not a test. We're not here to try to call children out on what they don't know. Authentic assessment is really building on what they already know and can do, so that we can then build on our instruction and levels of support, create experiences and environments that are appropriate for that. So if you can maybe reframe it as a curiosity, instead of as an assessment, just kind of a wondering about what is it that this child knows and can do hopefully that will help you to think about assessment more broadly. That it doesn't have to be this thing where everybody like gets all worked up for and has to sit down and go to a separate room and spend all this time. There's a time and a place for some of that, but I think really over time we've done far too much of that for children. And I think also, just to keep in mind, that applying assessment results should not end up in harming children. It shouldn't end up as a punishment for children. So you don't know how to write your name, now you can't go out for recess. Let's think about other ways to formulate experiences where that child can learn to write their name. I don't know why I'm on a big name kick today, but there are other things you can do, like maybe it's a sorting activity, and they're not there yet. So it's looking at this from a development